Welcome to the show this morning. I'm your host, Lance Roberts. Michael Lebowitz joining us. I want to say something here real quick. I want to make sure everybody understands where we're coming from. We are not downplaying the seriousness of the virus at all. It is a very serious thing. What we're talking about, though, are the impacts of psychological decisions that people are making because of the headlines that are out. So I don't want you to think that we're saying, it's just headlines. Media is making it all crazy. We're not saying that at all. This is a very serious thing, and there's a lot of response, and the economy is shutting down across all fronts. And this is a very, very serious issue that's going to impact a lot of people, and it's going to impact them very hard over the course of the next few months.
Right. And Lance, the reason to think that this isn't political, that there's more to it, is what's going on in Italy and Spain and South Korea, around the world. These aren't just domestic responses. These are global responses to the same exact pandemic.
Right. And and more importantly to that point is that this is a global recession, not just a U.S. recession. This is going to happen everywhere, all at once, because we're shutting everything down at one time. But let's talk about employment for a minute. There's an interesting situation coming from the employment front, because this is going to be a new test for companies that they're going to try to find out. Again, even our shop here, right? We are all working remotely. Brent and I are in the studio this morning only because we have to be here to broadcast. But you're in D.C., you're working remotely. The rest of our employees and staff at our company are all working remotely. This is going to be an interesting test for companies, and companies are going to have an interesting view of things about their business when they come out of this. We're going to see a big uptick in unemployment over the course of the next couple of months in particular. But most people are going to look at it like, well, as soon as this passes, I'll get hired back. One of the things that may come out of this is maybe not. Maybe companies are going to figure out that, A, they can be just as efficient working remotely. They can reduce overhead count, employment count, which is the most expensive part of a business. But they also reduce office sizes, lease spaces, all this other stuff by having more employees work remotely. They can look at this as a kind of an incubator of what the future of employment might start to look like.
Right. And if you remember, Lance, back in after September 11th, every corporation was on a rampage to redefine their emergency response to events, kind of like what we're seeing today, where the economy and markets close for a week or two. Right. So there were, I remember back at the time there was a new backup site built. So basically we had a second office. I was on a trading floor. So we had a second trading floor, and all of Wall Street had trading floors built in New Jersey and Connecticut as backups. Well, we're going to see kind of the modern day version, 20 years later or so. We're going to see the modern day version. Like you said, it's going to be people working for anyone that can work from home will.
Right. Which, this brings up investment ideas. So, for, people looking for investments, whenever we get through this, but, companies like Adobe, which do DocuSign, where you can do, contracts via remote signatures and these type of things. Meeting software where you're doing virtual remote meetings like Zoom software, GoToMeeting, those type of companies. There's going to be some opportunities in here, even with this changing employment environment. There's going to be companies that will thrive on that because they're already built for an environment of working digitally, working remotely, and operating that way.
And maybe even, I hate to say it, but like the WeWorks, Regis, right? Because it's hard to work from home, especially if you have little kids. So a lot of people are going to want to be in an office environment. They're going to need some of that professionalism around them. They're going to have to get out of the house because a kid's yelling, dog's barking. So think about where people can work.
Right. Yeah. No. This is going to be an interesting change we come out. But you brought up something I think that's important here. After 9/11 occurred, we actually shut down the financial markets for a week and tried to let everything calm down while we were trying to figure out what was going on with the terrorist attacks, et cetera. This is. This isn't the same environment, but it's got some similarities to it because we've got an event that's going on that we really don't know what the ramifications are fully just yet, and we're reacting to, the headlines and everything else that's happening in one of the most dire manners. Right, we're shutting down the economy. Does the Federal Reserve, the New York Stock Exchange, et cetera, the government decide that it's in the best interest to shut down the markets for a week or two?
I think so. I think that's what's coming. The problem with doing that is you're shutting off liquidity further. Look, you think about it, people that were called flat-footed that still own stocks that haven't sold anything and now potentially get laid off, or they just want to have a little more money in the bank. If they can't sell their stocks and raise money,
right?
Forget, this isn't a function of where they think the prices are going over the next few weeks and whether they want to take gains, take losses, protect against losses. This is about pure liquidity and spending money. And look, we now have, this is 20 years after September 11th. So the boomers right now are in their 60s and 70s. They're not in their 40s and 50s like they were back then. There's a huge class of the population that needs liquidity, right, and that were riding this prior bull market, not a bull market anymore, but they were riding that bull market because that was their answer to retirement.
Right. And I guess where this comes to is that, one of the problems with shutting down the markets is that you kind of freeze everything in place. And, as people kind of watch what's happening with the economy and these type of things, there's a negative event of shutting down the markets, which, people are trapped. They can't sell. They can't raise cash. A lot of people have their savings, in their investment accounts, and they're going to be very worried about, what's going to look like, their savings going to look like after the fact. And so while shutting down the markets may freeze kind of values where they are right now, you also freeze people from getting access to their money because they can't sell anything. They can't get to it. Potentially when the markets do reopen, you get a really big flush of people just going, man, I'm out. Right. There's a lot of people that have never seen a bear market. They didn't go through 2008. They didn't go through 2000. They've actually never seen a market like this. And one of the first reactions would be simply just to get out and get away from it, which we could shut down the markets, but actually make the problem worse when you try to reopen.
Right. And again, there's all those retirees that can't afford it,
right, that
don't have another 10 years to wait for values to come back. And who's to say they come back as quickly as they did after the financial crisis? Right.
Well, and again, look, I think we go back to the fact of what the Federal Reserve is doing is the Federal Reserve is going to keep throwing money at this and start to go into more creative measures, I imagine, to try to soften this blow, whatever it is, sooner rather than later. One of the interesting things is that people have been calling, saying, well, the Fed's just going to start buying stocks directly. Well, the problem is they can't do that without a congressional charter. Congress actually has to approve them to buy things other than government-guaranteed instruments. Right now, the Federal Reserve can only buy government-guaranteed instruments. So they have to buy treasuries or Ginnie Maes, which are Government National Mortgage Association bonds, but those are guaranteed mortgages. The question will be is because of the diversity and disparity that we have in Congress right now between the left and the right, and the fact that the Democrats control the House, will they be willing to work with the Federal Reserve and to approve a congressional charter change that would actually potentially, start to smooth the markets, but would also be helpful to Trump's reelection?
Right. And keep in mind that if something like that were to occur and Pelosi and the Democrats would agree, I'm sure there's something on their side, which would probably be massive spending to people, not to corporations, but right, to people, to the virus. And, we got to, right now, we got to deal with what's going on now, but there are consequences to all this. And I would argue the consequences of how we rescued the system 10 years ago is why we have today. Right. Because really what the Fed did was they encouraged speculation. They encouraged passive investing behaviors. They encouraged, just in general, so many bad behaviors among the banks, among buybacks, among corporations, even among individuals borrowing. And they basically, they told the market there is no risk in stocks. Don't worry, we got it. We got it. And here we are 10 years later with the size of debt outstanding much higher than it was 10 years ago, with the amount of speculation into passive strategies and just hedge funds and all that stuff just much larger than it was then. And again, we're faced with the same situation. And again, the Fed is looking to the same tools to bail out the system.
Right. And look, that's an interesting point you bring up. We'll talk about that when we come back from the break with Michael Lebowitz, CFA. You know, the belief has been for the last decade that don't worry about it. The Fed's got it. Right. And you can't, there's been articles written, you know, have we seen the end of bear markets? Can we never have a recession again? And Mike and I have been saying all along is that there'll be an event that comes along that breaks that belief. And here we are. So we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. Don't go away.
So tough. Gina works a diner all day, working for her man. She brings home her pay for love.
Got questions for Lance later? Ask now at realinvestmentadvice.com.